When you examine Chapter 4 on the punishment of the offenders, we say that the main emphasis is basically on four areas, that being retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, and rehabilitation. And a lot of folks these days say that there historically has really been too much of an emphasis on retribution, to get back at somebody or somebody to have their just deserts if they're committing an offense. Now, some folks feel that we should really start to take a look at a more new emphasis, and that new emphasis being restorative justice. I say new, but a new emphasis is really, in a sense, a bit of a misnomer, because the concept of restorative justice really goes back several hundred years. In fact, you could document and look back to the time of the Middle Ages in the 1200s, 1300s, with the concept of Wergild. Now, earlier in your text, in terms of looking at our history, we know that Wergild was basically meaning the literal translation of man money. And that man money came about as restitution between basically warring clans. And rather than getting into disputes and basically having an eye for an eye where they would take it out on each other physically, they developed a system called Wergild, where if you went ahead and, let's say for instance, you stole someone's oxen or cattle, etc., that you would actually pay a form of money or restitution back to the person that you stole from. So in that sense, what you basically did is you repaired a harm to the victim of your offense. That in and of itself is really, when we talk about restorative justice, that's really the foundation of restorative justice. Restorative justice is repairing the harm or fixing the harm that's been done to the victim. And again, the important thing here is that the focus is really on the individual victims. And who's involved in the process? Obviously, it's a process where the offender's involved, the victim is involved, and the community is involved. The offender has to be willing, first and foremost, to admit to the offense. So in other words, this is not a situation where it's an adversarial process where we're going to court and the offender's basically saying, hey, state of Alaska or whichever court system, you prove that I did this offense. The burden of proof is actually on you. We're going beyond that. We're saying where the restorative justice process, right up front, the offender is admitting their guilt, they're admitting their transgression, their behavior, the offense that they committed. And then again, the victim, for their part, him or her, whatever the case may be, is accepting of that person's willingness to enter into a restorative process. And the victim, really, in terms of recognition, the victim needs to very clearly be able to tell the offender what would need to happen in very concrete terms to fix or repair the harm that's been done. So the harm has not only been done to the victim, primarily to the victim, but the harm has also been done to the community at large. The community has suffered a loss just as much as the victim has suffered a loss, and the offender has essentially broken what we would consider to be a social contract at that point. And that's very key in the fact that that offender is recognizing breaking the social contract and recognizing the fact that they're going to need to take definitive action to go ahead and to repair the harm. Now, that repairing the harm might be, of course, in the form of monetary restitution. That repairing the harm may be in the form of actually doing something physical for the victim, fixing something, repairing something, writing a letter of apology, in whatever way is determined by the victim that would fix or to some point repair the harm. Now, we may take a look at it or ask the question, is restorative justice, does it work in all cases? We can't categorically say it's going to work in all cases. Certainly it's been tried and it's been very successful with property crimes, even more serious property crimes. Some would question the applicability or the appropriateness to use a restorative process for, like, let's say, a serious assault, a sexual assault, a serious physical assault against another individual. Although it's been tried in the past, there are circumstances there where one may question, the appropriate of a restorative process. But for the most part, when we're talking about lower level crimes, certainly misdemeanors, certainly crimes that are property crimes in nature, and of course, if we look statistically, the large majority of crimes are property crimes, it seems to be an appropriate thing to do at that point. So I guess one question to think about, and as you read through chapter 4, is to think about if you were the victim, let's say, of a property offense, of a property crime, would you be willing to enter into a restorative justice process? Would you be willing to meet with an offender and go ahead and hammer out what you see would be necessary to repair the harm for yourself? And that may be in a property crime case where somebody vandalized your property. Let's say you were the victim of a breaking and entering, victim of burglary, where you really felt that you were violated. You were certainly violated. Would you be willing to enter into a restorative agreement with an offender? That's a big question. It's a question to ponder during our discussion here in chapter 4.